Howard Miller was the kind of man who turned heads, even at 77. He carried himself with a kind of old-money confidence. Perfectly pressed suits, gold cufflinks, and a Rolex that always caught the light just right. He lived in an exclusive, gated community in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, where neighbors referred to him as Mr. Howard, with a kind of respectful distance reserved for men with power. On paper, Howard was everything you'd expect from a retired CEO and decorated Vietnam veteran. He donated generously to local charities, sat front row at church every Sunday with his wife of 53 years, Lorraine, always left a tip large enough to be remembered. But what no one knew, not his wife, not his church, not his two grown sons, was that Howard Miller had a secret life, and it was about to kill him. It started, like these things often do, with a chance encounter. Tiffany Evans was 21, working the late shift at a beachside bar just off a 1A. She wasn't for money, not even close. Raised in a two-bedroom apartment in Tampa by a single mother who worked nights as a nurse, Tiffany had moved to Fort Lauderdale, hoping for something better. College didn't stick. Rent was overdue. And lately, the tips weren't cutting it. She noticed Howard the moment he walked in. He was old, yes, but composed. Confident, like he knew the rules of the world and how to bend them in his favor. He ordered an old-fashioned, complimented her smile, and left a $100 tip on a $12 tab. He came back the next night, and the one after that. On the third night, he slipped her a business card. It didn't have a company logo, just his name and a handwritten message on the back. You deserve more. Call me if you're ready. Tiffany didn't call him that night, but she stared at that card for hours, sitting on the edge of her twin mattress, wondering what more really meant. 2 days later, she dialed the number. What followed was something between an arrangement and a romance. She never called it love, but it wasn't just about the money either. Howard rented her an apartment, paid off her car, took her to restaurants with $300 steaks and waiters who never made eye contact. He made her feel special until he made her feel small. Because Howard didn't just buy her time. He bought silence, control. He didn't want her going out alone, didn't want her posting photos. Gave her a second phone, just for us, he'd say. And slowly, Tiffany found herself drifting away from her friends, from her old life. But she stayed, because sometimes it's easier to stay than to start over broke. March 18th, 2023. Tiffany arrived at the Shoreline Resort downtown, just after 6 p.m. room 1705. She'd been there before. Howard was already inside, wearing a robe, sipping whiskey. He looked off, sweaty. His hands were trembling slightly. You okay? She asked. Never better, he said, flashing that same smile he always used when he was lying. Tiffany didn't know he'd just taken 2 unmarked pills, ordered online from a site with no FDA approval and no safety warnings. A dangerous black market sexual enhancement drug that promised results for men over 70. He wanted to feel young again. But what happened next was anything but. Less than an hour later, Tiffany was on the phone with 911, screaming for help. Howard had collapsed, his body convulsing, face pale, barely breathing. She tried CPR, begged him to wake up. But by the time paramedics arrived, Howard Miller was dead. Cardiac arrest. Suspected overdose. Time of death, 7:42 p.m. Tiffany sat in the corner of the hotel room, knees pulled to her chest, shaking. She didn't run. She didn't lie. She told the police everything. But within hours, the story had already been written. The next morning, headlines exploded. 77-year-old businessman dies in hotel room with mystery young woman. Sugar baby tragedy? Was it love or murder? By noon, the mystery woman had a name. And by nightfall, Tiffany Evans was in custody. At the police station, Tiffany sat in a cold, windowless room under buzzing fluorescent lights, still wearing the same dress from the night before. Her mascara had long since smeared. Her hands shook as she clutched a styrofoam cup of water she hadn't touched. The detectives asked the same questions over and over. Did you give Mr. Miller anything to drink? Did you know he was taking pills? Were you aware of any medical conditions? Did he ever talk about harming himself? She answered every question honestly. No, she didn't give him anything. No, she didn't know what pills he took. No, he never mentioned being sick. No, He never said he was depressed or suicidal. But to the detectives, that wasn't good enough. They kept circling back to the money, the apartment, the expensive gifts, the phone messages that sounded transactional. "You were being paid," one detective said flatly. "So, what were you really doing there?" Tiffany's eyes welled up. "We were together. I know it was wrong, but I didn't kill him. He took something on his own. I don't even know what." The detective leaned forward. "That's not how this looks. And the media's already calling it murder." The media. By the time Tiffany was transferred to Broward County Jail, her name and photo had already made their way onto every local news channel. Young woman linked to hotel death of local philanthropist. Was it passion or poison? Florida sugar baby arrested after businessman found dead. They used her mugshot on every broadcast. Not the one where she's smiling at graduation. Not the one from her old college ID. Just the one where she looks stunned, tear-streaked, barely breathing. They dissected her past like vultures. A shoplifting ticket from when she was 17. An eviction notice from an old roommate. Even Instagram photos and swimsuits became proof of her dangerous lifestyle. Howard Miller, meanwhile, was canonized in real time. Local pastors gave sermons in his honor. Veteran groups released statements calling him a man of integrity. His wife, Lorraine, standing at a podium next to their 2 adult sons, told the press. Howard was a loving husband, a generous father, and a man who believed in second chances. He didn't deserve to die like this, and he certainly didn't deserve to be taken advantage of in his final moments. Tiffany watched it all from a jail cell. No lawyer, no visitors, just a bunk for walls, and a growing sense that she had been condemned before her trial had even begun. Then came the charges: manslaughter and criminal negligence resulting in death. The state's theory was simple. Tiffany had either supplied Howard with unprescribed substances or knew he was taking them and failed to act responsibly. They painted her as a manipulative young woman who targeted a vulnerable older man for money and status and left him to die when it all went wrong. No one mentioned that she called 911 or tried to resuscitate him or stayed when she could have fled. None of that fit the narrative. The court denied her bail. Flight risk, the judge ruled. Media exposure too high. So Tiffany sat, day after day, night after night, in a facility where every inmate knew her name, not because of who she was, but because of who she had been with when he died. Other women whispered in the showers. Guards snickered when they handed her meals. One inmate left a note on her cot. "Guess sleeping your way to the top didn't work this time." She tore it up, but the words stayed. One night, she broke down completely. Knees on the concrete floor, she whispered, "God, I didn't kill him. But if you let them take me for it, maybe I deserved it. Maybe I deserve this." She sobbed until her voice gave out. But nobody heard. Then, one afternoon in early April, her name was called over the intercom. "Attorney visit." Tiffany looked up, confused. She hadn't contacted anyone, didn't have money to hire anyone. Her public defender had stopped coming after the second week. When she entered the visitor's room, a woman in a navy blue blazer with sharp eyes and a quiet strength stood waiting behind the glass. She slid a card under the opening. Lauren Mitchell, defense attorney, former state prosecutor. Lauren leaned into the speaker and said only this: "I've read the case file, and I believe you." Lauren Mitchell didn't take many cases anymore. Not since she left the state attorney's office 2 years ago. Burnout, disillusionment, and one too many wrongful convictions had pushed her to the edge. But something about Tiffany Evans stuck with her. She'd seen the headlines, like everyone else. But when she got her hands on the actual case file, thin, inconsistent, and full of holes, she knew something was off. Too clean, too easy, too convenient. And now here she was, sitting across from a woman the entire country had labeled a killer. Tiffany didn't trust Lauren at first. Why would she? She'd been lied to, used, and thrown away by the man who told her she mattered. Then the justice system, the media, and even strangers on the internet piled on. The idea that someone actually believed her, let alone wanted to help, felt dangerous. But Lauren was patient, direct, not interested in pity. "I don't need you to convince me," she said. "I need you to tell me what really happened. Every detail, especially the ones that don't make sense." And so Tiffany talked. For the first time in weeks, she let herself go back to room 1705. The pills, his sweating, the convulsions, the way he'd whispered, "If something happens, it's not your fault." Lauren wrote everything down, asked questions others hadn't. Did you ever see the bottle he took the pills from? No. Did the police ever ask if he took drugs regularly? No. Did anyone check his medical history? I don't think so. Lauren leaned back. Then let's find out. Back at her office, Lauren got to work. She subpoenaed Howard Miller's medical records. What she found shocked her. Howard had a long history of hypertension, heart arrhythmia, and erectile dysfunction. His doctor had warned him against using any kind of stimulant, even over-the-counter ones. But there was no prescription in the system for what was found in the room. Lauren dug deeper. She requested Howard's digital devices. His iPad, phone, laptop, all turned over to the police, barely examined. On his iPad, buried in a private browser folder, was a string of emails and order receipts from a dark web supplier of black market mail enhancement drugs. The product? A dangerous, unregulated cocktail known as Vigorex 99, a drug already tied to multiple cardiac deaths across the country. The latest order? 3 days before he died. But that wasn't the worst part. The prosecution's star piece of evidence was a small orange pill bottle found in Tiffany's apartment. It had Howard's name on it and a pharmacy label suggesting he'd been prescribed a legitimate ED drug. But Lauren noticed something odd. The lot number on the label didn't exist. The pharmacy name? Spelled wrong. The drug name? Slightly off-brand. She sent the bottle to an independent lab. The results came back clear. The bottle was fake. No active ingredient. No trace fingerprints. Not even Tiffany's. Someone had planted it. Then came the twist. Lauren interviewed Anna Morales, a housekeeper at the Shoreline Resort. Anna was on duty the day after Howard's death. She remembered something strange. A man in plain clothes, not a uniformed officer, entered room 1705 after it had been sealed. He said he was with the department, she recalled. Said he left his notes inside. Lauren showed her photos. Anna pointed without hesitation to Detective Ray Duncan, the same officer who logged the pill bottle into evidence. It wasn't just negligence anymore. It was tampering. Lauren filed a motion to suppress the tainted evidence and demanded an internal review. In court, she laid out the findings with calm precision. The fake pill bottle, the planted evidence, the unexamined cause of death, the dangerous drug Howard secretly ordered, the medical history that proved he was playing with fire, not Tiffany. The judge, visibly disturbed, called for a recess. 2 days later, the motion was granted. The bottle was inadmissible, and without it, the prosecution's case began to crumble. Outside the courthouse, reporters shoved microphones into Lauren's face. Do you think your client is innocent? Are you saying the police framed her? Is this a case of systemic bias? Lauren looked dead into the camera. My client was blamed because she was young, poor, and easy to vilify. Howard Miller made his choices. Tiffany Evans shouldn't die for them. That night, back in her cell, Tiffany cried, for the first time not from fear but relief. Maybe she had a chance. Maybe someone was finally listening. Maybe she wasn't alone anymore. When the judge ruled the pill bottle inadmissible, the prosecution's case began to unravel like cheap thread. But Lauren Mitchell knew better than to celebrate. This wasn't over, not by a long shot, because even without the bottle, public opinion was still stacked against Tiffany. The headlines hadn't changed. The whispers hadn't stopped. The scars hadn't faded. And Lauren had one goal left: to prove this wasn't just a case of bad assumptions. It was a deliberate setup. Her target? Detective Ray Duncan. He was the lead investigator, the man who logged the pill bottle, the one seen entering room 1705 after it was sealed. Lauren subpoenaed internal security logs from the hotel. They showed Duncan's keycard swipe, timestamped 2 hours after the scene had already been cleared and marked secured in the official report. She then obtained police department access records and found another anomaly. The evidence room entry where the pill bottle was logged had no corresponding body cam footage or witness signature, standard protocol for all entries. When confronted during a pre-trial hearing, Duncan claimed, "I forgot to turn my camera on." The judge raised an eyebrow. Lauren didn't blink. That week, Lauren tracked down an old colleague of Duncan's, Detective Carla Ramirez, who had quietly resigned from the department in 2022. Over coffee in a diner off I-95, Carla told Lauren what she had suspected all along. Duncan has a pattern. He makes messy cases look clean, sometimes too clean. We called him Mr. Closure behind his back. Lauren asked the million-dollar question. Did he ever plant evidence? Carla hesitated, stirred her coffee, then whispered, I can't prove it, but I've seen him come back with things he didn't leave with. It wasn't proof, but it was a crack, and cracks can break open everything. Meanwhile, Tiffany remained in jail, counting the days by the flicker of fluorescent lights and the rhythm of meal trays sliding through the slot. Lauren visited her every 2 days, each time with a new update. First, she brought the news about Duncan's suspicious keycard entry. Then, the evidence room logs. Finally, the forensic report confirming 0 fingerprints or DNA on the pill bottle. When Tiffany heard that last part, she laughed for the first time in months. Not from joy, more like disbelief. You mean they tried to frame me and didn't even bother to do it right? Lauren nodded. Sloppy lies don't stay hidden for long. Next came the forensic reenactment. Lauren hired an independent forensic toxicologist, Dr. Peter Lyle, to review Howard Miller's cause of death. He studied the autopsy report, toxicology results, and timeline. His conclusion was damning. Howard Miller had enough of the substance known as Vigorex 99 in his system to cause massive cardiovascular shock. This wasn't a typical overdose. It was a buildup over several days, combined with alcohol and pre-existing conditions. In my expert opinion, his death was self-inflicted through repeated, reckless use, not the result of foul play. Lauren smiled. That was the final puzzle piece. She filed a motion to dismiss all charges based on lack of admissible evidence, forensic confirmation of accidental death, and signs of police misconduct. The courtroom was silent as she made her case. The planted pill bottle, the secret return to the crime scene, the suspicious officer, the toxicology pointing away from any criminal action, and a timeline that made it physiologically impossible for Tiffany to be the cause. The prosecutor tried to push back, arguing Tiffany still benefited financially, still encouraged risky behavior. But Lauren cut through it. If being young and poor while dating someone old and reckless is a crime, we better start clearing space in every women's prison in America. But what she didn't do was kill him. 3 days later, the judge returned with a decision. Motion granted. All charges dismissed. Case closed. Tiffany walked out of Broward County Jail 173 days after she was arrested. No handcuffs. No orange jumpsuit. Just silence. Reporters mobbed her outside. She said nothing. She got into the back of Lauren's car, closed the door, and stared out the window. Her eyes didn't blink for miles. At a red light, Lauren finally asked, "What do you want to do next?" Tiffany's voice was hoarse. "Quiet. I want to go somewhere they don't look at me like I'm the worst thing that ever happened to him." Lauren didn't say anything. She just kept driving. But across the city, in a darkened police office, Detective Ray Duncan sat at his desk, staring at a copy of the judge's ruling. No more bottle. No more case. And now, an internal investigation. His hands trembled as he read the last line. Evidence handling protocols grossly violated. Subject to formal review. He lit a cigarette and waited for the walls to close in. Freedom didn't feel like freedom. Not when every step Tiffany Evans took outside was met with stares that burned through her like X-rays. Not when neighbors glanced at her like she was a ghost from a crime they were too invested in to unbelieve. She was no longer in jail, but she was far from free. Her name had been cleared. Her charges dropped. Her record expunged. But Google didn't care. Every headline still existed. Every video, every think piece, every social media comment still echoed the same thing. She was the girl who got away with it. The hate mail came in waves. Envelopes with no return address. Emails from strangers calling her a disgrace to womanhood. A killer in a pretty dress. Just lucky he died before you could bankrupt him. One message just read, "I hope the next old man sees you coming." She never replied. She just read them in silence and deleted each one with shaking hands. She couldn't go back to her old apartment. The landlord had rented it to someone else. She couldn't go back to her job. The bar didn't want the press. She couldn't go back to her friends. Most of them never texted her once. So she disappeared. With help from Lauren, she relocated to a small town in North Carolina. New zip code, new phone number, a studio above a florist shop. She took a job waitressing under a fake last name. For a while, she didn't speak much to anyone. She walked to work with her head down, refused to watch the news, started therapy, but mostly stared at the floor during sessions. Until one night, her therapist asked her something simple. When was the last time you said your own name and believed it belonged to someone worth saving? Tiffany couldn't answer. So she went home and opened her journal for the first time since jail. She wrote one sentence. I survived a lie that nearly killed me. Then she kept writing. A few months passed. The air got colder. Life quieted. She started to breathe again, just a little. And then one afternoon, while scrolling aimlessly online, she saw something. A podcast, legal-themed, top 10 trending. Episode 241, The Sugar Baby Who Wasn't. Her name wasn't in the title, but she knew. At first, she wanted to throw her phone, but something made her press play. And what she heard was different. The host defended her. He walked through the case, the holes, the media frenzy, the way Detective Duncan had planted evidence. He called it a textbook example of character assassination by public opinion. By the end of the episode, his voice dropped. What we owe Tiffany Evans is not just an apology. We owe her back the life we stole. She sat there, stunned, and for the first time in a year, she didn't feel dirty. She didn't feel hated. She felt human. 2 weeks later, the host invited her on. She almost said no, but Lauren encouraged her. You've been silent long enough. Now it's your turn. So she said yes. She didn't rehearse. She didn't read a statement. She just told the truth, the real truth, about Howard, about the pills, about what it felt like to be erased by a narrative no one cared to fact-check. I didn't kill anyone, she said on air, but I nearly died in there. Not in jail. Out here in the world, when everyone looked at me like I was a monster with lipstick. The episode exploded. Millions of downloads. The public shifted. Again, messages poured in. Not hate this time, but letters from other women, other survivors, other people who'd been falsely accused, publicly shamed, forgotten. Some said thank you. Others said, I thought I was alone. She started writing, not to be famous, but to be heard. Her essays got shared. A literary agent reached out. And in April 2025, Tiffany Evans published her first book, Room 1705, What I Survived, What I Learned, and Why I'm Still Here. It wasn't angry. It wasn't bitter. It was honest. And that made it powerful. She donated half the earnings to legal nonprofits helping women like her. The other half, she put towards something new, a fund for women who had been publicly defamed and left behind. She named it the 1705 Futures Fund, because room 1705 nearly became her grave. Instead, she turned it into a beginning. At a small book signing in Charlotte, a young woman walked up to her and said, I don't want to be you, but I'm so damn glad you exist. Tiffany smiled, not because she needed the validation, but because for the first time in 2 years, she believed it too. By the time Room 1705 hit its third print run, Tiffany Evans had become an accidental icon. She never asked for it. She never wanted her name trending on Twitter. Never imagined standing in front of college lecture halls talking about trauma and truth. Never planned to be anyone's face of survival. But the world, strangely, had decided to listen. And now, the magazines came calling. The first few offers were easy to ignore. Tabloids looking for scandalous quotes. Daytime talk shows asking if she could bring the dress she wore the night Howard Miller died. But then came an email that made her pause. Harper's Weekly. Not a tabloid. Not fluff. Real journalism. Real reach. The pitch was simple. We don't want to define you. We want you to define yourself. At first, Tiffany said no. She still didn't like cameras. Still hated the way lights reminded her of police interrogations. But Lauren reminded her, they wrote your story once without you. Now you get to write it with both hands on the pen. So she agreed. The photo shoot was done in her home. No studios, no makeup teams, no fancy styling. Just Tiffany in a simple white t-shirt, sitting cross-legged on a windowsill, holding a cup of tea. The headline? Tiffany Evans, the woman who lived to tell it herself. The article didn't shy away from the facts. It acknowledged her mistakes, her relationship with Howard, her silence when things didn't feel right, her blind spots, her fear, her desperation. But it also did what no one had done before. It gave her room to be complicated, to be young and poor and manipulated, to be both a victim and someone who made bad choices, to be human. When the article dropped, it shattered expectations. There were no clickbait headlines, no lurid quotes pulled out of context, just truth, raw and unfiltered. And this time, the public wasn't angry. They were listening. A few days later, Tiffany got a call. Netflix. They'd read the book, seen the Harper's piece, and they wanted the rights. Not to sensationalize it, not to turn her into some over-sexualized character in a dramatized mess. They wanted her voice, her story, her control, executive producer credit, script consultation, casting approval. At first, she thought it was a joke, but it wasn't. It was real. And suddenly, Room 1705 was being rebuilt on a soundstage. In production meetings, Tiffany made one thing clear. This isn't about making me look good. It's about showing what happens when the world decides what kind of girl you are before you even open your mouth. She helped write scenes, edited dialogue, made sure the woman playing her didn't cry too early, didn't smile too easily, didn't perform grief like it was theater. This needs to be real, she said, because too many women don't get to rewrite what's been done to them. The series was titled simply 1705, 6 episodes, one woman's fall and rise. The premiere aired in early 2026. It broke records for a limited docudrama. Critics called it quietly devastating and a masterpiece of restraint and power. Tiffany didn't attend the red carpet. She watched it from her couch, barefoot, hair in a bun, with a glass of ginger ale and Lauren by her side. When the final credits rolled, Tiffany didn't cry. She just whispered. That's what it felt like. A week later, she received an unexpected message. Lorraine Miller. It was short, typed. I watched it. I didn't know the whole story. I blamed you because I needed someone to blame. But I believe you now. I hope you're healing. L. Tiffany sat with the letter for an hour. Then she folded it in half, placed it in the back of her journal, and smiled. Just slightly. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't closure. But it was something. These days, Tiffany still lives simply. She teaches creative writing at a community college. Still drinks the same tea. Still wears the same sneakers she had when she walked out of jail. Sometimes, students whisper when they recognize her. Sometimes they ask for advice. She tells them the same thing. The world is loud. People will tell your story for you if you let them. So write your own first. And she means it, because for too long, she was the girl in the headlines. Now, she's the one writing them. Spring 2031, Asheville, North Carolina. The air smelled like lilacs and fresh rain. A breeze slipped through the open window of a small brick building tucked between a bookstore and a laundromat. Inside, Tiffany Evans, now 29, stood before a group of college students, a whiteboard behind her, and a stack of printed essays in her hands. Her hair was tied back. She wore no makeup. A loose cardigan hung from her shoulders. And her voice, once unsure and tremulous, now carried a quiet steadiness. Truth isn't always loud, she told the room. Sometimes it whispers, and you've got to fight like hell to keep people from silencing it. No one in that class dared check their phones. No one blinked, because they weren't just listening to a writing teacher. They were listening to someone who had bled her way back to life. Since the release of 1705, Tiffany had faded from the spotlight by choice. She declined interviews, skipped award shows, and refused to cash in on her story beyond what she'd already allowed. Instead, she built a life out of quiet things. Morning walks, library runs, a cat named Olive, and a program she launched called Second Voice, a mentorship initiative for young women wrongfully accused, overlooked, or buried under shame they didn't earn. She used her story not as a brand, but as a bridge, and others began to walk across. One of them was Melina Carter, a 19-year-old accused of setting fire to the car of a man who had assaulted her. Tiffany met her during a Zoom support session. Melina had been abandoned by her family, harassed online, and was moments away from pleading guilty just to end the nightmare. Tiffany leaned forward and said, "They'll tell you confessing makes it go away, but surviving with your head held high makes you dangerous. And I want you to be dangerous." Melina didn't plead guilty. She fought. She won. Tiffany never called herself an activist. Never liked that word. Too political. Too clean. She was a woman who'd been broken publicly and decided to rebuild publicly, too. Her home office was cluttered with letters from strangers. "Thank you for not letting them erase you. You gave me the courage to tell the truth, even when no one believed me. I named my daughter Tiffany." Sometimes those letters made her cry, but more often they made her write. She began working on a second book, not a memoir, not about Howard, not even about herself, but about the system, the stories we believe too quickly, the women we blame too easily, the truth we discard too comfortably. Its working title? Guilty Until Clicked. One rainy afternoon, Tiffany visited the Shoreline Resort in Fort Lauderdale for the first time in years. Room 1705 was still there, different decor, new carpet, but the number remained. She didn't ask to go in. She just stood outside the door for a few minutes. Breathed in, breathed out, then whispered, "You didn't get the last word," and walked away. Back home that night, she opened her laptop to an email from Netflix. "Congratulations, 1705 has been greenlit for a follow-up documentary." Where are they now? They wanted her to narrate, to step back into the spotlight, to become a face again. She stared at the screen, unmoved, then typed a reply. "No, thank you. The girl in the headlines is gone. I'm just a writer now," and hit send. At sunset, she stepped onto her porch, barefoot, a mug of chamomile in hand. A teenage girl from the Second Voice program had just moved into the apartment next door. She was shy, nervous, barely made eye contact. Tiffany knocked gently on her door and offered a smile. "You don't have to talk, but if you want to, I'm here." The girl nodded. No words, but something passed between them, something soft and solid, the kind of thing no headline could name. 5 years later, Tiffany Evans was no longer a case, or a scandal, or a symbol. She was just a woman, still healing, still writing, still standing. There was no grand finale, no fireworks, no courtroom applause or emotional confessions. Just life, quiet, soft around the edges, slowly but surely whole again. That Tiffany Evans had learned was how healing really worked. She no longer needed to remind people who she was, or who she wasn't. She didn't correct strangers who stared too long, or flinch when someone whispered her name, because the truth no longer lived on a microphone. It lived inside her, in the way she looked people in the eye again, in the way she laughed without hesitation, in the way she wrote, taught, and created space for stories that never made headlines. Once a week, she met with a small group of women at the public library. Some had survived prison. Some had survived shame. All had survived silence. They didn't talk about trauma as a badge. They talked about what came after. Tiffany didn't lead the group. She just showed up, brought tea, listened, shared. Sometimes she'd say things like, "We don't have to be loud to be real. You're not responsible for the version of you they created. You were never meant to disappear." And that was enough. The 1705 Futures Fund had helped over 200 women get legal support, counseling, and housing since its founding. Tiffany refused to name it after herself. She said, "I don't want them to feel like they owe me. I want them to feel like they're next in line to be free." People still asked about him. Howard Miller. Not as much anymore. But once in a while, someone would tiptoe around it. "How did it start? Did you love him? Do you ever think it was your fault?" And Tiffany would pause, take a breath, then say, "It started because I was scared. No, I didn't love him. And no, but I used to think I did." Because that was the truth, too. One rainy morning, a high school invited her to speak. She almost declined, but something inside her, maybe the memory of who she used to be, nudged her forward. So she went. A gym full of teenagers. Too many cell phones. Too much noise. She stepped up to the mic, heart thumping in her ears, and simply said, "I want to talk to the girl who thinks she's out of options. I want to talk to the boy who thinks silence makes him strong. I want to talk to anyone who's ever been told the worst thing about them is the only thing that matters. Because it's not. The gym fell quiet. Phones dropped. And for those 5 minutes, the world felt still. Years later, when someone asked her what justice meant, she smiled gently and replied, "Justice isn't always a verdict. Sometimes it's walking through town and not being afraid of your own name." She never married, never tried to erase the past. She wrote, she mentored, she kept living, not loudly, not perfectly, but fully. And that, she realized, was more powerful than anything a court could grant. Tiffany Evans didn't win her case. She survived it, and that was the victory